Okay, so we're now in chapter 16 of Murach's MySQL book, and we're going to be dealing with triggers and events. A trigger basically says when an event happens, when something happens to a database, trigger this program to run. I want you to do this. And an insert, an update, or a delete will happen to a table, and you can have a trigger created where you can run the trigger before the update, delete, or insert happens, or you can run it after. And it really depends on what the business rule is that you're trying to solve. The example that they give on page 447 doesn't really lend itself comfortably with the data they're feeding in, so we're going to manipulate that just a little bit. So let's go ahead and read 445, 446, and 447, and we're going to do a modified version of the work on 447. Okay, so here's the code that creates a trigger. We're going to use the AP database. We're going to drop the trigger vendors before update, if it exists. We're setting the delimiter. We're going to create the trigger vendors before update on vendors for each row. Begin and end, and then here you can see set, and what we're doing here is we're making sure that the data that's being passed in is going to be set to uppercase. So if we look over here under tables, under vendors, we'll see a section for triggers, and right now there isn't any triggers there. So let's go ahead and build this trigger. Okay, the trigger's built. Refresh the object browser, and we'll see that the trigger does exist now under the table vendors. Triggers and events are always set towards a table. Now, let's take a look at some data. So if we take a look and we select, and the select statement will not actually issue the trigger. But if we take this select statement and run it, we see that vendor ID is in state WI and it's capitalized. Now, what we want to do is we're going to issue an update command. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change it from WI to MA in lowercase so you can actually see the change happen. Now remember, this is a before trigger. So now if I run this update, making the vendor state go to Massachusetts, I run it, and now I do the select. Notice that the lowercase Massachusetts that I did the set on is now an uppercase Massachusetts, because what happened was it took the vendor state and I uppercased it. This is helping to ensure data integrity before it gets saved to the database. And what we want to do before we move on, let's change this back to Wisconsin just in case we need it set that way. And then do a select and verify that the change happened. And it did. Great. Okay, let's move on to pages 448 and 449, and we'll see a little more complex trigger being created. Okay, so now we have another trigger, and this one's going to be created on the invoices table. So you can see here we're going to drop the trigger invoices before update, and you can see that create trigger invoices before update on invoices. So it'll be assigned to the invoices table. We're declaring a variable called sum line item total. We're doing a select statement, and if the sum is not equal to the invoice total, then we have an error, and we're going to pass an error statement to the screen, I believe. So let's go ahead and create this trigger. And now let's go to our invoices table, and we'll see that our trigger is there. Now let's look at some data. Let's take a select statement. And we're looking at invoice ID number 100. And we're going to run it. And now let's do the update. And we're going to update for invoice ID 100, invoice total of 600. Let's run that. And if we take a look down here, we actually are getting line item total must match invoice total. So what happens is we're checking the child records, the line items, and that total has to equal the same, and they don't. So when we are trying to force an invoice total to be 600, that's a wrong invoice total. If anything, what we should be doing is taking our line item totals and adding it and then updating the invoice total the other way. But the point here is, before we went ahead and did this update to the invoice total, we were able to validate some data in some other tables to make sure that it was correct. And it wasn't correct. We manually threw a single state error, and we called it HY000 just because we did, and we set the message, and we can see what happens. And obviously in programming, what you do is you pull that up where you display it to the user's screen. Okay, so now we're on pages 450 and 451. That puts us about 100 pages away from the end of the book, so we're actually doing pretty good. And what we're going to do is we're going to use our AP database still. We're going to drop the table invoice audit, and I don't think it's there, but just in case it is, we're dropping it. And it says here, no, it doesn't exist, so that's fine. And we're going to create a table called invoice audit. And now if we refresh our object browser, we'll see the invoice audit table does exist. There's the columns for it. And now what we want to do is we want to drop a couple of triggers to see if they exist. And most likely they don't. We haven't created them yet. But let's drop that one and drop that one. And these are the two triggers we're going to create. And so now, right here, we have this bit of code here. I'm going to delete all the work we just did. You might save it to Notepad or something. And then what we're going to do is create a trigger called invoices after insert and invoices after delete. So after an insert happens, I want to do this information. Basically, I want to insert the records into the audit table, and I also want to insert the records into after a delete. Now, so what the audit table is doing is when an insert happens to the invoices table, because we're doing this based upon triggers on the invoices table, I want to always add a record to the audit table to know what happened. And we're saying we have this field here called for the status. What did you do? I did an insert. I did a delete. And so at that point is we know whenever a record was inserted to the table or deleted. So it's a history that we are actually creating here. So I'm going to run all of this. And now I open up my invoices. I get before update. I don't know why I don't have the after one. What happened there? Let's create that. Let's make sure our delimiter is set. And then let's create this one here. Yeah, that should work. Maybe I have to do these separately. Now refresh. Yeah, okay. So now we have our delete and after insert, and after delete. So now they're both there. Great. Okay, so now these triggers are happening that after a record gets inserted, I want to do something, and after a record gets deleted, I want to do something. So let's go select star from invoices audit. Let's look at the data that's in there. And there is no data because we haven't done anything yet. And now let's insert a row of information into the invoices table. We got a 115 here. I know that that's going to throw an error. So I'm going to go 201. And then let's run that. And now let's look at our audit table. And why didn't it happen? Did we get an error on our insert? Let's see, insert rows into here. Let's run that. And then let's select. And that's interesting. It's throwing an error. It's select star. Why does it keep running that select star? Let's just get rid of this. Okay, so now I got the row. For some reason, having both statements out there messed up. Select star from invoice says audit. Now I've got a record that it happened. Now, if I actually, let's change this to 202. We've inserted another row, and let's do a select. Now we see we have two records. So anytime we've done something where not only are we inserting into the invoices table, we're also inserting into the invoices audit table because of the trigger that was set. And now what we can do is let's issue the delete command, and let's delete that record. And so, matter of fact, I'm going to delete not 115, but I'm going to delete 201, invoice ID 201, and execute that. And now let's check our audit. And duplicate entry for primary key 22. Oh, do you know what? So it ran the whole thing again, so it's throwing an error. Let's get rid of that. I must be, am I clicking on the wrong button sometimes? Am I clicking on this guy by mistake? I think so. There. And now let's select. And now we can see the deleted row. And now if I change this one here to 202 and issue that, and then I check this, now you see I have 4 records. So I know when things were inserted. And so this is a nice way that when something happens to one table, an update, an insert, or a select, you can create triggers on them to then automatically update other tables or do other work, whatever you need it to do. Okay, we're currently still in the AP database. If I issue a command called show triggers, we can see the 4 triggers that we created. If I issue show triggers in EX for the EX database, we can see that no triggers have been created in the EX database. Show triggers in the AP database that look like or begin with VEN. And we see one of those. And then we could drop the trigger or drop trigger if exists, which is the safer way of doing it. We're not going to do those because I'm liking to keep those triggers around. And you can always right-click. You can actually click on it, I believe, and delete your triggers as well. I'm sure there's a way if you open up a trigger that you can do it through the interface. But most of the times, what we're going to be doing is issuing commands. Okay, let's move on. Pages 454 and 455 introduce us to the event scheduler. We're in the AP database, and if I show variables like event scheduler, I see by default the event scheduler is off. Basically, an event scheduler allows us to create a scheduled event to happen at a certain day or time. So say if you wanted a monthly process or a weekly process or a daily process to run, you would turn on your event scheduler, and then what you would do is create events, and then they will automatically get executed when you've scheduled them. So now, as you can see, show variables like event scheduler, right now it's off. If we go set global for the global variable called event scheduler, set it to on, and now let's take a look at that. We now see that it's on. And what we want to do is, if these 2 events exist right now, let's just drop them. We haven't created them, but we're just going to drop them to make sure little house cleaning is right. So they didn't exist. You can see down here, they did not exist, but we've dropped them just in case. And our event scheduler is on. Now what we want to do is create those two events. And so we're basically going to just run all of this code. And we see this event and this event have in fact been created. And it basically says, if create event, one-time delete audit rows on schedule at now plus an interval of 1 month. Do this. Delete the from the invoice audit table where the action date is less than, where action date is less than now minus a 1 month limit 100. So basically what they're doing here is in that audit table we created, we are going to delete rows that are older than a month. And then here, create event, delete, monthly delete, that's a one-time delete. This is a monthly delete based on a schedule and on the state that we would then delete rows where that's true. Okay, I've already created them, so it didn't let me create them again, which is good. So let's delete that. And then if I double check, I see that my, oh, it's set to on. I wanted to show it. Sorry, I meant to do this. And we see that our event scheduler is on. Let's move forward. Okay, pages 456 and 457 finish up the chapter. And if we run this command, show events, we see we have a couple of events occurred. We can show the events in a given database. We can show the events that that have the beginning interval of month. There's the one. We can alter an event. Let's go back to show the events. And notice that these are type recurring and one time and their status enabled. We can actually take this monthly delete audit rows, which is enabled, and we can disable it. Let's show the events again, and we see that it's disabled. And we can now enable it, turn it back on, and then show the events again, and we see that it's enabled. And what we can do is alter. We did that with the alter command, and we can even rename an event. And then if I go back to show events, I see that I am now renamed to one-time delete audits. One-time delete audits is now the new name. I can drop the event, and I can drop the event if it exists. Two different versions of the same thing. So let's drop this one event. Let's show the events. We only have one. Let's drop the other one. Let's show the events. Let's drop this. Boom. Oh, I didn't want to do that. I hit it for everything again. Show events. And I want to drop one-time delete audits. Let's go copy this. One-time delete. Yeah. One-time delete audits. Control-C. So I'm going to delete that one. Show events. They're all gone. And the last thing I want to do is let's set our event scheduler to off. Let's turn it off because we don't need it anymore. And let's verify that it's turned off. Here. And it's off. Great. Okay, so now you're seeing that with triggers, we can have events like delete, update, and insert. run other pieces of code that you've done. We can do triggers before one of those events, one of those actions happens, or you can do it after. Or you can actually create a schedule where you can have different jobs run at any given time, date, time, month, or whatever you want it to do. A lot of power available for you in MySQL. This is just like PL SQL, Oracle, and a lot of the SQL Server. They all have these same types of functionalities built into them. The syntax is pretty much the same. There might be a little difference between one version of SQL, whether it's SQL Server might be slightly different with the words and terms than Oracle, PL SQL, or MySQL, but the basic same commands are all there and the same functionality is there. So we're good on Chapter 16, which basically is finishing up now Module 7, which leaves us Chapter 17, 18, and 19, some more database administration type of work that will get us into the last module. And we'll have some fun with that and call it a day. Thank you.